All right. Good morning, Dad.
Good morning.
Today is Friday, November 28th, and I was just on X and I was looking up that the two National Guardsmen that were shot,
Uh-huh.
and I was seeing some interesting things that people were saying on Twitter. And one was that, okay, a couple things I've heard. So one is that the person that shot these two National Guardsmen was recruited by the CIA at the age of 14 in Afghanistan. So he's working with the U.S. Special Forces, Kandahar Strike Force, something like this, for like 11 years, backed by the CIA. And apparently, there were a bunch of searches for one of the National Guardsmen that was shot 3 days, or was it 4 days? I forget. Before she was shot, out of Israel. Her name was Sarah Beckstrom. And then, and I just checked this myself right before we did this. You can go to Google Trends, Google search trends, and select the country, and then type in any search query and see how many searches have been made for that query.
Yeah.
And there's no searches made for the past several years for this person. And then right
Yeah.
before she was killed, there are searches for her name, specifically her name, Sarah Beckstrom, 3 or 4 days before she was killed, from Tel Aviv. Okay, I know this is just we're conspiracy,
Yeah.
but that's
Yeah.
that's weird, right? That's hard to explain, and it just
That is hard to explain. I don't have an explanation. That's just all I can say is that's very, very strange. And
and
it,
we
it
I've been feeling this for a while. We've talked about this, like what is it that Israel can do to sort of either pivot, draw attention away from their atrocities, and let's focus on Islamophobia or things like this, or what could they do to draw us further into a war, a false flag. And then you hear people like Laura Loomer, she's always talking about, oh, there's some crazy Muslim radicals here in this country, they're going to do something big. And then we see something like this happen. It's not a massive terrorist attack, but it's a horrific tragedy. They shot and killed,
yeah.
two National Guardsmen. One of them, this woman, Sarah Beckstrom, they killed them just in cold blood.
Yeah.
What do you think?
I don't know. It's kind of hard to see. I don't know how to explain that. That's such a coincidence that it seems like it can't be a coincidence. I mean, the chance of that happening. Of course it could, but that just it's like, lightning striking twice.
It's the same thing. We saw the same thing with the Charlie Kirk assassination as well. Like the surgeon, people that were involved around the case,
Right.
all their names, there were searches for them out of Israel. So it's just like,
Okay.
what's
Well,
going
like in
on
the case
here?
of Charlie Kirk, I can, I don't know what happened. Again, I'm not saying that these Israelis were behind it or anything, but you could see that they had a motivation. You could see why they would want him out of the way. We know a lot of a lot of bombshells have been dropped about Charlie Kirk and his, moving away from the pro-Israel camp towards the end of his life there. So you do see the motivation, right? You see that there's a motive. Now, that doesn't mean that they did it. It could be the lone gunman, but at least you do see a motive, and I think any responsible investigator should actually explore the possibility of those links. I think any responsible investigator should look towards Israel in that case. Now, in this case, I don't see what the motive would be. I just don't get it. So there's some weird connection, but I just don't see how, why Israel would want this to happen.
Well, I think it's just the larger narrative that we're wanting to say that the enemies of Judeo-Christian values, Judeo-Christian society, they want to tie the Judeo-Christian back together and make the enemy is Muslims, Islam. And
Right.
you see that it's a very clear effort that's being done here in the United States. You see it on Twitter all like, oh, we got this huge problem of Qatari influence or whatever it is. Everyone's like, what, you won't talk about Israeli influence? All the people that are yelling about Qatari influence are the Zionists that don't want to say, don't look at us. It's not us influencing you. It's the Qataris,
Yeah, right.
And it's the same thing here. It's like, no, it's not, the enemies of the people that are killing Christians or whatever. Like this, it's not Jews. It's all the Muslims. The Muslims are the bad guys.
Right.
We gotta fight them. We are united as Jews and Christians together. And I don't like making it religious because it's Israel. It's not Jews. I hate that they always are conflating this, Judaism and Zionism. But
Yeah. Well, it's because what the Zionists do themselves, that's a big part of the problem, right? Yeah, okay. Like the lower Loomer crowd would probably take this and run with it. I don't know why they would particularly target Sarah Beckstrom. Maybe because she's Jewish.
I don't know.
And then that helps. I don't know. Yeah, and then also it's just hard to see. I don't know. It's just hard for me to see, though. Like, how do you convince somebody to go? I guess you can't really convince somebody to go and I don't know. How do you convince somebody to go and kill a couple of National Guardsmen if that's not really what he wants to do?
I don't know. We'll kill your family or something like that. Those types of things.
I don't know. Right.
I mean, but
I wanted to say I find it again.
Well, did you say Sarah Beckstrom?
Hard to see why.
Did you say she was Jewish?
Okay, well, you said that she had a connection with Israel, or did I?
No, I didn't say that.
Yeah, she didn't. Okay,
no, I'm just saying she was being Googled
from
Googled
Israel. From Israel, right? Exactly, right. Okay, yeah, but why target her? Maybe because she's female, that just makes her more sympathetic. Yeah, yeah. I can't say it's impossible. That's all I can say. That is that the fact of those searches just makes it, does raise my eyebrows, and I think you have to look at it. It's just hard for me to see. I know it's not impossible, but it's hard for me to see how this is something they could have arranged with this, this Afghan. But maybe they could, maybe they did have something on him, and they knew where to apply some pressure or whatever. It's worth looking at. It's worth thinking about. I'm not going to. I used to reject those things out of hand. Now I don't. It's partly because of our conversations about Israel and how reckless they've been certainly in the Middle East. They have increasingly been throwing off constraints. How they regard what's happening in the U.S. as the eighth front, and there's something there's no reason to believe that they're not going to be reckless. They're on this front as well, that they're not going to throw off constraints. Yeah, maybe. Well, that's all I can say.
Yeah.
It's not. I won't entirely discount it, but it could just be what it appears to be. Just one angry individual. And some weird coincidence, it seems like quite an extraordinary coincidence, and so much of a coincidence that I think you have to look towards Israel and at least ask those questions.
Yeah. Maybe it is just a coincidence and there's nothing here, but I would just say that I'm kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? I'm feeling good that people are so suspicious of Israel. That just means that they can't even sneeze now without people looking at them suspiciously,
right.
Which means it's just going to be very difficult for them to pull off any type of potential false flag or any operation, because we've talked about that as Israel is on borrowed time because of its actions and it's losing support here in the United States, that it's going to have to do something. And we talked about the Samson option, if there's an existential threat militarily that they could do something, but what could they do if they're losing just their support? Their greatest benefactor is starting to turn on them. What are they going to do? And it just, everybody's thinking that. And so I just feel like, and I know it's wrong. I know it's wrong. Like I trip and I'm like, oh my God, Israel, they're out here to,
right.
and that's too much.
Right.
But I'm glad that people are suspicious.
I mean, they deserve it. I think probably the suspicion can be excessive. Perhaps some of these links will prove to be imaginary. But they've merited this suspicion, by all the things that they've done, what we've observed out in the open really over the last few years and what we know about things like the USS Liberty. I'm just thinking that if the USS Liberty incident occurred now, probably they wouldn't get away with it. They got away with it back then. But I think you're right that there are enough people who have become very skeptical, and again, beyond skeptical, very suspicious of Israel, that they wouldn't be able to pull it off now.
When do you think is going to be the next sort of moment where we are able to sort of deal a severe blow to the Zionists? Would it be through the ballot box and the midterm election? Is that something that we should be looking forward to? Or do you think we
Well,
should
I
even worry
hope.
about elections? It's just a
Yeah,
matter.
right. I think theoretically, potentially they could. I mean, we're a long ways from getting some sort of solid voting block or, anti-Zionist voting block. We have a handful of people on the Democrat side of the aisle, and an even smaller number really on the Republican side. And we're going to lose one of those, when Marjorie Taylor Greene leaves in January. So we have a ways to go before you have a voting bloc of a size that can really influence policy. That's,
But won't their
but
just actions be
but I think
constrained by public sentiment? Like if they,
right, but especially if you get more people that are outspoken, even if they don't have the votes. The more people that you have, the more members of Congress that you have who are openly anti-Zionist and are not afraid to express that opinion. I think that's the more that perceptions of Israel will change, the trend will continue. So it's something to hope for. I don't think we'll see any immediate results from that, but it's something to hope for. It's part of the, it will, let's say, electoral victories in the coming midterm elections could, again, it just simply contribute to the trend that we're already observing and continue to undermine support for Israel. It won't happen all the way, but we can, that support is being eaten away at the foundations. That's what we're seeing in a rather dramatic way. We're not talking about just, again, slight, single digit changes in the polls or anything. This is major total collapse on the left, and we're among young people on the left, and something similar now happening on the right. That's huge, right? And so anything that amplifies that is good, and we should welcome it.
yeah, I feel we're in the midst of this titanic shift. But it takes a while, and I feel like we all know where this is going. I kind of feel like I think about like when I was a little kid and it'd be 2 weeks from Christmas and I'd just be like, man, I just wish I could just nap for 2 weeks and just wake up and then the presents would be under the tree. I kind of feel like that with everything that's going on now. It's just, I feel like we know where everything is headed, but it's just a very painful process, and we're just constantly like evaluating it and seeing these little slight changes, but it's all moving the same way. Do you wish that you could just take a nap for a couple years and wake up and be like, oh, it's all over?
No, I think I want to watch it happen.
Yeah.
That's why I'm here. That's why I'm talking.
Okay, well then, what's the biggest thing happening? What do we want to talk about?
The biggest thing happening.
I mean, we've talked pretty extensively about the peace plan in Ukraine. It feels like that's the big thing, but I don't know if there's anything new that we want to kind of go over and explore there.
Yeah, I don't think there's any. I think everybody knows, again, that the Europeans immediately intervened, and they applied pressure. They weren't actually, I think, present at the meeting in Geneva between the Americans and the Ukrainians. But the end result of that meeting in Geneva just a few days ago was that the 28-point plan became a 19-point plan, and it was something more favorable to the Ukrainians. So anyway, we know whatever they agreed upon or whatever they hammered out in Geneva is not going to be anywhere close to acceptable to the Russians. There's just no question about it, because even that original 28-point plan, though, again, showed progress, really did not meet minimal Russian requirements. So, we have this, and I think what we're seeing just sort of typical Donald Trump too, with these flip-flops. He comes up with something in a hurry. My understanding is that this was drafted probably by Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner, neither of them who have any diplomatic experience to speak of. And the Russians have noted that. They said that this is just not written in anything like diplomatic language. These are basically just talking points. They're saying, this is not a real peace plan. And there are a lot of questions, there are a lot of ambiguities, and so again, this is something that was produced in a rush by amateurs, again, sort of typical of Donald Trump. and then he starts boasting, we've got it. He puts a lot of pressure on the Ukrainians. We've seen him do that in the past. The Ukrainians look like they're about to buckle, but then they arrange a meeting, and then in the meeting, they get the Americans to walk back, just like we've seen in the past. Again, remember after the call that was supposed to lead to the Budapest summit meeting, Zelensky met with Trump, and Trump at first, insisted on the Russian position, and then he buckled. And then we're back to square one. So we're seeing the same thing happen again. It's just like Groundhog Day. It just seems like every couple of months, we go through this. And it's not going to end in anything. It's not something that the Russians can agree to.
Well, you said the plan was produced in a rush, and I think that was because Trump realized that, oh my God, I could have a collapse on my hand and this will be awful. So we're going to do that. And now, so you're saying that he's been convinced otherwise, that, maybe it's not collapsing. Like, even though everything we're seeing is moving that direction, is faster and faster advances.
Yeah. Who knows what's going on in his mind? But clearly people have gone to work on him, saying, oh yeah, you're right. But this is something that, and the Ukrainians recognize this, but they really have to do it this way, and we're sure the Russians will agree with it. Who knows what he's been convinced of? It's hard to say because he has flip-flopped so often. That's just the unfortunate truth, and he'll flip-flop again. We're not even a year into his term, and we've already seen like half a dozen major flip-flops on this issue, and we'll probably see, I don't know, another 50.
Right. Okay, so then, but...
Well, I should say one thing, though. I think like the most significant event in the past week or two is not this plan, which is not going to go anywhere, but the appointment of Dan Driscoll to replace Kellogg. Because Kellogg was obviously... basically an advocate for Ukraine. Again, his daughter lives there, is very much a pro-Ukrainian activist. And he had the president's ear, and I think that was constantly pushing Trump in, the pro-Ukraine direction, the pro-European and direction, and away from the Russian demands. And now he's gone. So that, if we're going to look for something that that is going to have a long-term effect, I think it's the appointment of Dan Driscoll. Again, I guess a good friend of Vice President Vance's. Now, I don't think it's going to. Unfortunately, a deal is just not possible for various reasons. It's not just that Trump tends to flip-flop, but, he has so many powers arrayed against him in this case, within his own administration and throughout the deep state in this country and all of Europe, the Ukrainians, whatever. We know that. So he's up against a lot. But I think it is a positive development and actually significant that he has appointed this Dan Driscoll, who apparently read the Riot Act to the Ukrainians, said, hey, you're losing this war. And it really shocked them, and apparently shocked the Europeans or the president.
Well, what's the Riot Act? I've heard it mentioned before. Can you explain what's the...
Okay, well, yeah, okay, that's just sort of, okay, it's just it's a figure of speech. It's just to say, just to not pull your punches and just tell them completely how it is, and let them know that if you don't comply, you don't recognize, acknowledge what we're presenting you here, the consequences are going to be huge. That's what he did. Right. And I think that's the first time. So that's something. And if he stays in that position, I'm sure there are a lot of people that are going to work to get him out of it. They're not happy with this appointment, are sad to see Kellogg go. But if he stays there, that makes a difference, because I think Trump is very much influenced. He clearly is influenced by the people around him. And the more people he has like that, the more likely that we'll have positive outcomes in relation to the Ukraine war. Now, again, I think it's too much to hope for a real settlement at this point, sadly, because it would be good if the war could end soon. But maybe people, I'm hopeful that somebody like Driscoll would again be a voice of realism that you might hear when later on there will be pressures to escalate in a very dangerous way. And the more voices of reason and sanity around Trump, the better.
For sure. Well, we talked about this on Wednesday, just that a peace plan isn't possible, that the trust bank is empty between Russia and the
even
US.
If exactly.
Right. So
even if we actually did agree to meet their demands, the Russians would have a very good reason to hesitate, to sign on the dotted line. And I'm sure, again, as we said last time, many in the Kremlin would say you just can't do any kind of agreement with them. Even if they, on paper, it looks really good. Just they have a record of breaking their agreements.
Right. Or you would have to have very strict sort of verification enforcement measures that I think wouldn't be palatable to the West to swallow. So and it seems like a lot of other analysts believe the same thing. I was listening to Duran. It seems like the Alexes are on the same page as well. They present the option that basically for Trump is that he has to walk away now. Just leave this dumpster fire and don't look back. And that's the only way to do it. Otherwise, you're going to be stuck on the escalating escalator, as they say, right? So do you believe that's where we are? But the thing is, when we say we're on the escalatory ladder, it's like, I just don't know how much more escalation is left. So it's just, I don't know if it really matters. So it's just like, well, why? I wonder what kind of false confidence that the people around Trump might be feeding him. It's like, don't worry, Mr. President. What do we got? What are we doing?
Yeah, right. Yeah, we've gone up, and we've gone up that so-called escalator, up the escalatory ladder quite a ways. We're close to the top now, and it clearly hasn't done anything. There are a few more options, and there is the Tomahawk, but we've talked about its limitations. But potentially it could do something. It could very easily strike Moscow or St. Petersburg, or, it's within its range. Again, they have the good air defense. They may bring it down, but if you fire enough of them, one's likely to get through. And if it hits the Kremlin or something, you can imagine what the results might be. So there is that potential, that risk, even though it's a small one. We have the Tomahawk, and then the other thing, which we're constantly hearing about, from people like Macron, is troops on the ground. Now they're talking about post-ceasefire troops. That's what they're talking about now. But it could become, but the pressure to do it, even earlier, is going to, exist. That idea is out there already, but it's that idea is going to become increasingly hard to ignore, and the pressure to insert troops even before a ceasefire is going to be increasingly great as the front lines collapse, and that's when we really enter a danger zone. And so I guess I don't disagree with the Alexes about walking away from it. It's easier to walk away than you can do that. That's within his power, right? The power of the President of the United States to walk away from this conflict. To actually enforce a settlement is not within his power. And I think the chance is so slim that he really shouldn't waste any more time on it. The problem with walking away, though, is that it's not like, I've heard it described this way by different people. It's just that, that he walks away, hands it over to Europe, and then it's Europe's problem. And he can say, well, that doesn't have anything to do with us. Unfortunately, that's not how things are going to work. If he walks away, then there's a collapse. All fingers will be pointing at him, and they'll say it's because he walked away. And the responsibility will put entirely on his shoulders. So I don't think at this point he can escape the responsibility. This defeat will become his defeat. Even if it's not fair, that's how it's going to be framed.
You just got to suck it up because there's no other alternative, right?
Yeah. Well, I just don't know if he can. That's the thing.
Well, what is the alternative?
The problem is that he has been so undisciplined in his first, 10 months in office. And his administration has spoken with so many different voices. Occasionally he'll say something that runs counter to the narrative, and some of his people, even Rubio has, occasionally they'll kind of puncture the narrative for a point. But in general, they haven't. They haven't been united in their messaging. Nowhere near it. If he came out and he just said, like, this is the situation, this is a stupid war that should never have been started, and Biden did it, he loves to say this, and he can go ahead and make that argument, even though there are people can point out to what he did during his first term and how he contributed to the start of the war himself. But let's just set that aside. That's fine. If he had started off that way and then said, look, we all have to understand that Ukraine cannot win this war, and continuing to send the arms, is just going to actually contribute to the destruction of Ukraine, and will lead to the loss of hundreds of thousands of more Ukrainian soldiers. This has to end. Look, it's ugly, but that's the way it is. The longer this goes on, the uglier it will become. If he just did that and really presented that argument, there would be a lot of howls of protest. But then you can go ahead, and if you're in the right, I believe eventually people come around and see the truth of it. But he just hasn't done that. He's on one foot and then the other, and then so I don't. It's going to be hard for him to defend himself when the time comes, because he hasn't put together a cogent argument. And it'll be very, very easy to pin the blame on him. And then there'll be tremendous pressure for him to intervene in some way. I'm afraid that's what we're looking at right now.
But how can we intervene? Well, we've been intervening a lot.
Oh, yeah. Right.
What?
We can, right. And even, again, directly, no-fly zone. There'll be pressure to do that, which means that American aircraft are going to fire on Russian aircraft. In other words, we're going to go to war with Russia in the air. That's what a no-fly zone means. It's not like you put up some signs, no flying here. That's not what it is.
Well, so that's World War III is what you're saying.
Yeah, essentially. So that's right. That's the risk. There will be pressure. Remember, in the opening months of the war, there was a lot of demands coming from the Europeans. I remember from the Poles and the Ukrainians. No fly zone, no fly zone, no fly zone. And eventually it died away. The Biden administration wasn't that crazy. They didn't do it.
Do you think
that'll come back, and it'll be real strong? And then, of course, troops on the ground. But again, that can lead to, American troops firing at Russian troops. Again, we got World War III. I guess I don't think they're going to go that far, but there are crazy people out there, and we have. I think it goes against the instincts of our president, but we have seen him, he's just Mr. Inconsistency, and he's shown himself to be unable to really hold his ground. And who knows, it could happen. So it will be there's some scary moments lying in the not so distant future. Let's just put it that way.
Yeah, you painted a picture where it sounds like Trump won't be able to handle the heat of a Ukrainian collapse, and that the pressure is going to be so high, and that we've seen that he's not very stable and sticks to his guns, that, something like a no-fly zone. I could just see him saying that. I mean, he says stuff like that all the time, actually. He's like, we'll start nuclear testing. Oh, we'll send our Russian nuclear subs off of Russia. He just says these things, and then
he doesn't really understand what's going on, and doesn't understand the implications. He could even be the one who says it. Yeah, we're in point, and then actually some of his advisors, even though they're hawks, will say, "Yeah, we hate the Russians or whatever, but we don't want to have World War III, Mr. President."
Do you think that the one thing that really is saving us is just the fundamental weakness of the U.S. military and NATO? Like, that is really what might just save all of our skins, is that we just can't handle it. We can't fight a real war on so many different levels. Just the munitions, but I think a huge part of it when you're talking about a no-fly zone or sending troops on the ground is that the West, our militaries are casualty adverse. We have developed our militaries where we get to be the ones flying around the sky and dropping bombs on people and using our precision guided missiles and Excalibur artillery shells, whatever. We don't even have to see the enemy. but that's not what's going to happen if you go to war with Russia. We see what that just the meat grinder of Ukraine, just the absolute hell that the Ukrainian soldiers are going through. A million dead, people just being blown apart by massive bombs, massive firepower. All of a sudden, it's like talk about us going to Afghanistan. It's going to be like reversed. Now we're the Afghans getting blown apart.
Right. Well, yeah, it just reminds me, I've read some personal accounts by mercenaries that signed up. They thought it was going to be fun. Some of them had fought in Afghanistan and in similar wars, against much weaker enemies. And they said it's not like it. Like, in Afghanistan, you can spend part of the day, firing your gun from a very well fortified position with strong air support. No real fear of the enemy firing back and doing you harm. Maybe there's a little bit of risk, so that just contributes to the thrill, right? I guess that's what these people are after. But then at the end of the day, you just go back, you retreat just a couple of miles, maybe I shouldn't say retreat, but, you can redeploy or just a couple miles to the rear and have a barbecue. And they're saying you can't do that in Ukraine, anywhere like within 20 miles of the front. And, you try to do something like that, engage in an outdoor activity, and the drones find you and kill you. You just have to be you're living constantly in fear. And for anywhere close to the front, it's not just at the front, not just at the line of contact, but 20, 30 miles, from the line of contact. And they say, this is not the same thing. It's not fun, So a lot of them have left if those that have survived, right? No, it's true. It's just a completely different kind of war. And it's not the kind of war that we used to fighting. And again, it's not really our war. And that's the thing. It's like the Russians there, and they understand that this is our war. And the Ukrainians that are fighting there, think this is our war. We're willing to die for this. But it's one thing to drop bombs on a third world country and come back, greeted as a hero. It's another to enter the meat grinder, to engage in a war of attrition with the Russians. And very quickly, they're going to start asking, what is this for? I don't even really understand what this conflict is about. Very few Americans do. And are you going to ask them to die for it? Well, again, there are ways to whip up, the war fever. We've seen it happen again and again. And the danger, again, when it's the Americans, is that it could go nuclear. But let's say it doesn't, and you whip up the war fever. You convince your troops to head east to face the Russians, and the war continues. It's conventional, but very quickly, I think it's just like these mercenaries discover. They'll say, "This is not the same kind of war," and I don't know why. Like half of my buddies are dead, and we don't know why we're here, and that kind of news is going to come back to the news, together with the body bags, are going to return to the U.S. and support for the war is going to die very quickly.
How long do you think the United States could even maintain a high-intensity war? Like, if it did happen, if we were there and okay, we're committing,
right? Because
we've been giving pretty much everything we have to the Ukrainians, and they've been running out. Right. So if we go there, what are we going to be shooting with? What do we have?
Yeah, well, we do have stockpiles, but they have been greatly reduced, right? But that's one thing that's happened recently. I think it probably would have happened under Biden too. But we started to hear back in May or so, hey, we can't give any more of these because we just don't have any more to give. That doesn't mean that we don't have a single one, but our stockpile has gone down to a critical level, and I think it's probably not nearly enough for war attrition. We find we just don't have the production capacity, and we just are not geared for that kind of war. This is not the war that our military has been planning for over the last several decades. We have been planning for, these quick and easy wars against weaker opponents. Use overwhelming firepower, shock and awe in the first few days, and then in a couple of months, the war is over. You don't have to worry about the stockpiles. You don't have to worry about even the cost of the war so much. And maybe the maintenance problems, because you only go so far, and then you can deal with all that later. But if you get in, but like we see, this war is entering its fourth year. You have to have huge stockpiles. You have to have tremendous production capacity. You have to have weapons that are very durable and, low maintenance. And when they break down, they need to, either you can repair them fairly quickly and inexpensively, or, you have cheap replacements for them. That's not the kind of military we have. We have very expensive and, often rather kind of fragile weapon systems, which again can perform pretty well in a short and quick war, but they're just not designed for a war of attrition. We just don't have, neither. We don't have the military equipment geared for it, and we don't have the MIC behind it that would support that kind of war. So if that's what we get into, we're going to lose it. And the scary thing, though, is that if we're losing it, the pressure to go nuclear will start to rise. So let's hope we don't get involved.
Yeah, well, the U.S. military was equipped for a war of attrition, and then many people will argue that's really the main contribution of the United States from World War II, which is our ability to crank out tons of Sherman tanks and aircrafts and boats. We just flooded, Western Europe with them, flooded the UK with them, and were able to, do the D-Day invasion. But that's not the type of military we have now. So usually we always say that you're geared to fight the last war, but the real big war that we had was World War II, and everything since has just been kind of these little, I wouldn't call them real wars. They're just, we beat up third world countries and things like this. But how did we lose that complete ability? Is it this? I mean, is it the same thing where we were talking about on Wednesday as well, how we just offshored so much of our industry here overseas. Yeah. We did the same thing with our defense base.
Yeah,
it just seems so crazy to think that you would offshore your industrial defense base.
Well, of course, we do have that's a big part of our economy now is the military. Some of the largest, most profitable corporations in the country rely largely on military contracts. And you even point to Boeing. Of course, they produce civilian airliners, but they do have a lot of military contracts too. That's a major part of our economy. But what we found is that a lot of the components and materials that they rely on are sourced from overseas, and many from China. And that's just something that happened. That was part of that general, rush to offshore things. What we were talking about last time, the financialization and the hollowing out of the American economy that occurred, starting in the 1980s mainly, and has continued ever since. There was just, it didn't, from a strategic point of view, that should not have happened. And now we're in a real fix. And we should just recognize it and be humble and just say, okay, we're not really in a position to engage in a major war with any peer adversary, and probably not for another 10, 15 years. Let's start, fixing our problems here. But you don't see that realism, unfortunately, or it's all too rare. It just shows a complete lack of strategic thinking at the top. And I think it's just this smugness, again, too. It's just like if you've been number one for a long time, you just stop. You don't feel like the need to really think things through and make the hard decisions. These were easy decisions to make, decisions to outsource different processes because a lot of people just profited from them, in the short term. And that's what we've created. The MIC is now built on this, on these, let's say, procurement programs that make everybody happy at home. And for the longest time, it's just like there wasn't any real war on the horizon, and people stopped thinking strategically. There just didn't seem to need to it. And it's, hey, look, everybody's making money. What are you worried about? And then when we have these little wars and it's really flashy and it looks good on TV and Yeah, but that's over now. We're looking at the possibility of real wars, and we're not ready for it, and we're not really waking. We haven't woken up to the reality.
Yeah, but the strange thing for me is when I see just military personnel that get up on Fox News or Keith Kellogg. Are they aware of this? Aware of the problems with our military industrial base? That if we do get in a real war, we will only have enough munitions to even sustain it for a couple weeks or a couple months. All of our our military doctrine relies on precision guided missiles and bombs, but those can be rendered completely useless thanks to jamming. We rely completely on air superiority, our F-16 and F-35. We know that you can't just fly over Russia. They have air defense that could shoot those down. Stealth technology, we're realizing, is it really stealth technology in this day and age? It's just all of these things that are, just crucial pillars of our military doctrine just don't work in a war with a pure adversary. And if we're able to talk about it and understand it, we're not military experts, but we can just see it just from observing this war, then there's no way that someone like Keith Kellogg doesn't know that, right? He has to know that. The people, or do they not?
Right.
Are they just completely in their own bubble?
Yeah, I don't think they're lying. I think, probably they're exposed to that information, but they just disregard it. And I think they just developed habits of mind. It's just this reflexive sense of superiority. We're America, we're number one. And they almost, when people describe the grim reality, they see them as, let's say, not part of the team. It's easy to actually think more emotionally. It's like, we just have to be committed. It's a matter of willpower. We are number one. And if we just, if we just keep on reminding ourselves of it, we will win this. There are realists within the administration. I guess one of them is Elbridge Colby, who's Undersecretary of War for Policy.
But he's a China hawk. He wants
right. I know he is, but but I think he's also a realist. This is what my understanding is, anyway. We did have that paper, which some people, I don't know that he was the author of it, but some people think that he might have been the author of it. So it was in any case, that the stabilization RAND paper that was presented, that was very realist. Maybe it wasn't Elbridge Colby. I might be mistaken to associate it with him. But in any case, it was, presented, but then it was taken down. It's just like they don't want to hear it. I guess what you have is in so many of our institutions and very much including our military institutions, you just have this culture of positivity and supremacy, the supremacist kind of thinking that is just so deeply ingrained that if you don't belong to that culture, you're regarded as, just a naysayer, somebody who's, kind of is a detriment to the team and, possibly a Putinist or whatever, just this is the way that they kind of circled the wagon psychologically. And you see it, I don't, it's not that the realists don't exist, but they are at a career disadvantage. They don't rise because that's not what the people at the top want to hear. I think that's the sort of thing. It becomes self-reinforcing. The president doesn't want to hear this stuff. It doesn't help let's say his election chances or re-election chances. Because, he likes to go out and tell the crowds we're number one. Everybody likes to hear it. And it just goes all the way down. He says, okay, don't give them, there's that really kind of grim, pessimistic report. And then say, we just don't even have the production capacity to do this. We're going to have to rework the whole system. It'll take a decade. It's going to cost many tens of billions, hundreds of billions of dollars. Okay, there's that. There are people who are saying that. And then there are others saying, hey, everything right now is great. We're number one. Don't worry about it. And for a politician, he likes to hear the positive message in this country. And then that just kind of works its way down. It's just like everybody learns that you want to rise to the top and you want to get onto the television programs and you want to be, you got to be part of this kind of cult of positivity. And then, that just goes through, that ends up just rotting the institution, corrupting these different institutions, so that you don't have, intelligent, realistic thinkers making strategy, but, instead you have these yes men at the top, just pursuing a strategy that is already failing and doubling down on it.
Do you really think that's how it works in the Pentagon? A lot of it, there's this cult of positivity and supremacy. And so they could be talking to like, oh, sir, we're really not ready to go to war. We don't have the munitions. The men aren't willing. Our equipment won't work there. And they're just like, shut up and go watch Captain of America 3 times until you feel good. Is that really what you think is happening?
Yeah. I may be exaggerating a bit. I think they still have a foot in the real world. And we've seen that, we've had the Pentagon say, hey, our stockpiles have reached critical levels. We do have people like Dan Driscoll who came and, just again told the Ukrainians how it was, and saying, we can't save you. So there are people like that. But they are fighting an uphill battle. We still have, let's just hope that the real went out. It's not like they don't exist at all and they don't have any impact. But we can see, how far we've gone. Our policy has not changed in a really significant way. We haven't recognized it, and there's really no signs that we have. You just hear the occasional voices. Again, these people are not totally insane, I don't think. So when it comes to that move that really could take us into World War III, so far they've stepped back. I think we can hope in that, that there's just the minimum amount of sanity and realism there.
So there's just a core of realism, but it's surrounded by all of this cult of positivity, as you said, and we've got to break through all those layers and hopefully find that core.
I think that's a good way to put it.
Yeah, I just, you're not making me feel good, because I was just saying how I think that we can't go into World War III because of just the fundamental weakness of the U.S. military. But kind of what you're saying is that fundamental weakness be damned. We believe enough. And so we will continue to do what we do.
Yeah. Well, it's, again, there have been times when we could have gone to World War III and we've stepped back. There was that attempt just at the very beginning of the war, the S-300 missile fired by Ukraine, that actually killed, some 2 Poles. And there was an attempt to pin it on the Russians and to invoke Article 5. And I remember it's just like usually whatever the Ukrainians say, we would support it. It's the Bucha massacre. Yeah, it was the evil Russians. Yeah, it's always the evil Russians. But this time, no, we didn't support it. So it was right there. That was a sign that, okay, there are limits to how far we go. And let's just hope that those limits remain. I do have hope that they will. I don't think they're totally insane. And then when it really comes to right there at the edge of the precipice, they'll step back. But it's scary because, you don't want to be on the edge of the precipice. There's always a chance you'll go over.
Right. Yeah, no, prior to this war in Ukraine, I think nobody really understood what a modern war looked like. And there was just this belief that the U.S. was number one. I had it. I think you had it. Much of the world had it. But that is dissipated for many of us, especially for us that are paying attention. Right. We know that's not true. Do you believe that belief is still a dominant belief of of U.S. military might, or is there this? Have we reached this
I think
point?
In the West it is, because, we talk about it, we listen to other geopolitical dissidents, and there's, within this large, significant dissident community, the understanding is crystal clear. And then when you get out of the U.S. and out of the collective West, you find it again, right? There are a lot of people who see it, who have woken up to it. But I'm struck, I do make a point of just going to mainstream media like the New York Times, and you get out of your back, it's the same old narrative. It's just, Russia is not only evil, but it's incredibly weak, but that somehow it presents a threat to all Europe. Nothing changes. It seems like it. So the narrative remains. It hasn't. We really haven't woken up to it.
Do you think that belief?
And there's still there's the economic side of it too. I just wanted to mention, it was something I was reading this morning. There was a paper that was presented at the very beginning of the war, back in 2022. I think it was maybe it was a London School of Economics publication, something like that. But anyway, it just pointed out that Russia, in GDP terms, was about equal to Belgium and the Netherlands combined. And so this person very confidently predicted that Russia was going to lose the war, because it's just Russia is just an economic midget. There's just no way. And you would think if it's a war of attrition, yeah, he'd be right. And I remember thinking that at the time. But I woke up to the reality. Now, you would think that in general, the Europeans should wake up to it. Maybe they, again, they had that supreme confidence at the beginning. It was misplaced, but they should see it by now. But you don't see it in their actions. You don't see it in the rhetoric. The narrative remains. They still just have the sense that, yeah, we're far superior. And, you're always being reassured that the Russian economy is about to collapse. It hasn't collapsed next, but with the next package it will. They still haven't abandoned it.
Do you think that belief of U.S. supremacy, military supremacy, that belief needs to be shattered for us to end any type of hawkish behavior? Because that really is what underpins everything. This is what underpins the Europeans. He's like, we got this. We can. It's like, well, we don't got it, but we know that the U.S. is number one. So
right.
That means we got it, And then so many people still in America got it. Yeah, we can handle it. Venezuela, no problem. China put them in their place. Russia put them in their place.
Yeah, right.
Because there is that.
I think you're right. So, I think it's actually, and it's the same with the Ukrainians. I think it's starting to falter in Ukraine because they're the ones who are suffering the reality, directly. It's beginning to falter, but it's still there. It's still there. It's just a sense that, of course, we can't really lose this. It just must be just a lack of will on the part of the U.S., because we all know that the U.S. system is so vastly superior to the Russian system. I think that's the way a lot of Ukrainians still think. And it's just for whatever reason, they're selfish or they've got their own problems and they're just not giving us what we need. But we know that if they did, we would win this war. Yeah, and it's still there. Again, it's, I think it's skepticism is starting to grow, but it's still there, and very much so. So I think, it does underpin. In the end, it underpins just all kinds of really catastrophic decisions. It's just a sense that, our power is unlimited, and refusal to recognize that, just has led us into, one catastrophe after another.
I understand that, and it makes sense. That's like they only gave us what we need, then we could win. But the thing is, what is it? What do they need? What is it that we haven't given other than
it's always weapons? Something. It's always the next thing.
But we're running out of because
I've heard
things.
It. I was just like they just have to for the longest time. They have to give us the ATACMS. They have to give us, and then they got the ATACMS. That didn't change it. It's just the F-16s. Once we have the F-16s, that'll turn the tide. They got the F-16s, so we don't hear about them. They're hiding over in the westernmost Ukraine. Well, now it's the next thing is the Tomahawks, or but that's really coming to the top rung of the ladder, right? So at some point, you hope that they, that again we don't actually go nuclear, and then it's understood. Oh, we went all the way up that ladder. We're at the top rung. There's not another one. Oops, we were wrong. The U.S. is not. The all-powerful deity that we thought it was.
Yeah, well, I guess it's scary because we've been in this war for over 3 years, and that attitude is still persistent throughout the West. And like we said, that this attitude, it kind of underpins the whole war effort and the ability for the U.S. to continue its aggressive posturing across the globe. So, it's ironically, like, I feel like we need to know to avoid war, we need to have a recognition of the weakness within our own military industrial complex. And I was hoping that the Ukraine war would show that, but it still seems like we have this refusal. So it almost seems like the way to avoid war is that we actually have to go to war and just lose utterly. And then we kind of know, like, oh, that's almost what it sounds like you're saying. It's like, how can we break through to everybody that, like, hey, look, this it's just not working. We're not the superpower we want to be.
Right. Yeah, no, I don't know. It's scary. The thing is, like, if we actually go all the way up to the top rung, just short of World War III, and okay, it turns out that we don't have what we are unable to supply the weapons that would enable Ukraine to win the war. Ukraine suffers a humiliating defeat. You would hope that would be, the beginning of a new, sobered up, realistic West. But again, it's just like, looking at the quality of our leadership, there's going to be all kinds of backstabbing, or not just backstabbing, but there will be a search for explanations, but the explanations will be anything but, okay, yeah, we're just not as strong as we thought we are. And, I think it's a dream that is a notion, this notion of unrivaled supremacy that is just very hard for these people to let go. It's just part of who they are.
So, I mean, you say that we'll just keep on going up this until the top rung right before World War III, but aren't we already there? I mean, what the things that we've talked that potentially that it could lead to when there's a faster collapse? You mentioned no-fly zone, Tomahawk missiles, troops on the ground. Aren't all those World War III options?
Well, I think definitely the no-fly zone and like American troops on the ground would mean World War III. Now, Tomahawks take us right to the edge. It could be, we could also just hope that Russian air defense is so good that they never, it never becomes an issue.
But still, you're shooting
Taurus missiles.
You're still shooting missiles. The U.S. is shooting these missiles that could potentially be nuclear-equipped missiles into Russia.
Right.
That's what else?
No. It's
declaration of war.
Again, but what we have, what might save us again, is a very, very cool, calm, rational person on the other side who is Vladimir Putin, who, understands this, but is going to do what he can to avoid going over that precipice. And he will, retaliate, but he'll calibrate it in a way, where hopefully, the retaliation will fall just short of provoking World War III. This is not something that should inspire a whole lot of confidence, right? It's going to be a scary situation when we get there, but I think we probably will get to that point. And my hope is, maybe it's just wishful thinking, but I think we will stop short of actually taking those final steps.
Okay,
and then again, Putin will find a way of retaliating and satisfying, the hawks within his own government.
So do you think that then basically what we're looking at are the two options that we have is that Trump just has to accept a humiliating defeat, Putin goes and takes Odessa, potentially Kharkov as well, expands beyond, and Trump either walks away or just has to deal with the fact that he did have a fall of Saigon moment and his presidency, his legacy is ruined? Or the other option is World War III. Are you painting those two scenarios? Is there something in between? There's always stuff in between, right? I mean, there's a way.
Yeah. Well, there's
not a lot.
People can get, there's not a lot. That's right. Politicians can be very creative when they have their backs against the wall, and maybe they'll figure something out, some distraction. We'll start a war somewhere else, and Trump, especially during the early months and during his first term, he was a master of deflecting and of denying responsibility. Right? You just do it quite openly. You just pretend that that what he said, I never really meant it or whatever. He may have a way of just distracting the electorate and and spinning things where he just manages to pull out of it. But it's going to be hard because this is not going to be a minor event. This is not, again, this is not Iraq. This is in Europe, in the largest country in Europe, and it's against Russia. And I don't know how he's going to do it. I guess that's what I should say. I don't know, but maybe he's got some sort of rabbit in his hat.
Well, do you feel like it's almost a coin toss on which way it can go? Like being able to weasel out and walk away from the whole thing, and then and that's terrifying.
Yeah,
we're talking.
Yeah, no, it is right. I didn't know. And then I would say people say that okay, we go to World War III or the beginnings of World War III. It doesn't mean inevitably that it's going to a nuclear war, but the risk goes way, way up at that point. The chance that we go nuclear, it goes way, way up at that point. So I just hope that the saner minds, they say, this is terrible, President, but, we just can't do this. This means World War III, which means maybe the end of the world. Let's do something else, Mr. President. And hopefully, Trump will say, yeah, okay.
I hope
we'll blame it on Biden.
I hope so. Well, I mean, that's terrifying. When we have these talks, we've talked about the possibility of World War III, but it's always just seemed like hyperbole. It just doesn't ever seem like anything that will actually happen. But when we have these discussions, like, my God, this could go either way.
Right. Let's be honest too. I mean, we're getting a lot of war talk from European leaders saying that predicting war with Russia. Maybe this is just a very cynical ploy to increase military budgets, scare their populations for that purpose or whatever. But whether or not it's cynical, it's just like war is in the air and people are getting habituated to it. And that makes, I think, war all the more likely in the long run. It may not be the long run. See, the thing is, like this collapse, maybe a march on Odessa. I don't know. Again, we've talked about, the Ukrainians clearly are weakening and are showing themselves unable to hold the line in a way that they could before. They seem to be nearing a collapse, but still we got a ways to go. But you just don't know. These are really, there's a great deal of uncertainty as to the future course of this war. It could end, there could be a total collapse within the next year, and then we could see the Russians marching on Odessa by the end of next year, or it could go on for another 3 years. I don't know. But either way, it's really not that far in the future.
Right. I'm just thinking if NATO really did get involved in this war, NATO is just so ill-equipped for this war. Like you said, we were prepared to fight the last war, the war where you do these, maneuvers with your tanks and then you fly your aircraft over. None of the training that I think NATO has been doing over the past 20, 30 years is worth diddly squat, but it's so ingrained, their method, their way of fighting, that we are the greatest fighting force on the planet, that I think that is going to be incredibly damaging to them when they actually do end up in a real war. It's like, oh man, we actually, everything, all of our training, all of our equipment is not suited for this war. Right. We are screwed.
Well, that's what the Ukrainians have been saying, is that, I received this training. Some of it was helpful, but, frankly, I told my instructor, this is not going to work. You don't understand what's happening out there. This is, this would be a total, you're telling me me and my platoon should do this. We would all be dead within 5 minutes if we attempted to do that. You don't understand. And, I think there's some sort of awareness that's seeping into the military institutions. They're starting to think, look at drones. It's really very slow, and I think they're way behind the curve. But in general, they still haven't woken up to the reality. I remember during that, the summer offensive of 2023, there was all that hullabaloo. There was that great deal of confidence. They were going to, because they had trained these guys and given them NATO equipment. They had NATO methods and whatever. And of course, it was just a total disaster. Ended in a tremendous defeat for the Ukrainians. And the Ukrainians understood that. They started actually changing their tactics halfway through because the NATO tactics that they had been taught were not working. But then instead of getting, admissions of error from NATO officials or American generals, or it was rather that, the stupid Ukrainians, they're not following our, we gave them a plan and they're not sticking to it. The stupid Ukrainians, they're casualty averse, saying that you should, anyway, they should go out there and get killed on your, and I think unfortunately that, those same people just refuse to see the new reality and are living, in this past where American arms and Western arms were supreme. They're still running the show. And if they actually, if they enter the war, they're going to have the same experience that the Ukrainians had in 2023.
Right.
And maybe even worse now, actually, because the Russians have moved way beyond from that point.
That's true.
They have many more drones and many more sophisticated drones. And I think it would be a really nasty wake-up call.
Yesterday you were saying you got this PBS documentary of the summer offensive of 2023, and you started watching it last night. Did you finish it?
I did, yeah. I would recommend it. It's done by PBS, and it's on the Ukrainian side. So, it's kind of framed from the Ukrainian point of view, but you see how things are on the ground. I think it does give you a sense of how these battles have unfolded. Yeah, and here you don't really get the full extent of it. You're told at the beginning, some of these soldiers are saying is that they're kind of shaking their heads, who spent 3 months and we're trying to take this little town of Andriivka. I looked it up. Andriivka had a population of 74 in 2001. And I remember that battle. I remember following it closely, and back there in 2022, it just went on and on and on. It was 3 months to take this one tiny, tiny little town. And the Ukrainians finally got it. You just see really the end of that process in this documentary. But you can, I would recommend, it's just, first of all, it's just what they did to get there is that they went down really a line of trees, maybe you could call it a belt of forested land between fields on both sides. They say the fields on both sides were all mined by the Russians. So that's the only way. So they spent 3 months going down this belt, and they were fought all the way. And eventually they got to Andriivka. And you see at the end, they unfurled the Ukrainian flag, and there's nothing left of Andriivka. It was tiny to begin with. And then you learn, which I knew to be a fact, that the Russians took it back later. It's now like 10 miles in the rear behind, the Russians took Chasiv and they're now in Konstantinovka, and this little town of Andreevka is probably 10 miles in the rear. It was just a meaningless battle, and who knows how many lives were expended in it.
Scary war. Too many people have died, and it just sounds like we can't extricate ourselves. It is astonishing to me that where we are now, when this war started, I think a lot of people were just thinking like, it's a little scary, but America's always fighting wars. There's always wars around the world. And here we are 3 years later, and it just keeps on escalating. And we had Trump, who said that he was going to end it in 24 hours. He was just all about it. And now I'm just like, okay, once the dogs of war are out, it's just, you can't put them away. No. You just can't put them away. I just can't believe that we're looking at this situation right now.
Well, again, it's in a lot of ways it's similar to World War I. The various armies, were, I think they were confident that the whole thing would be settled in a month or two, and similar to the American Civil War. That's the way it began, and then. But of course, it went on for another 4 years, and we're talking about, in the case of World War I, tens of millions killed.
And so much.
There's more similarities too. That was a war of attrition with very, very little movement on the line during those 4 years. I saw a map actually this morning showing the over the course of 2 years, maybe it was 1915 and 1916, like the amount of movement, like the amount of territory that the Western allies were able to take from the Germans on the Western Front, and it was tiny. It's actually the Russians have taken a lot more in the past 2 years than they took. But of course, it ended in a collapse. So we may see something very similar.
Yeah, it's scary to think that the lives of so many millions of people are just in the hands of the egos of a few. And I think that's that's the real danger here, is the ego of our leaders.
Yeah.
You know, they're like, I can't go down. Everything is about their legacy. They want to be remembered in history as this great person, instead of the person that made all these mistakes and lost everything.
Yeah.
And the thing is, it's just, you can see, you know, people always want to do the World War II parallels. It's like, oh, you know, if you're just stubborn enough, like Winston Churchill, and just say, no, we won't make peace. We're just going to have war. And then you win it. And now you're this great hero. And everybody talks about how great you are. You just have to be persistent and stick. And who cares if 60 million people die?
Yeah,
you won. You won, and now you're a hero.
Well, in the case of Churchill, though, you know, in the end, he was confident that he had the U.S. at his back, and the U.S. was the Colossus at that time. And you're right. In the end, it wasn't a matter of will, you know, though it's kind of, you know, we point to Churchill and say, you know, his great speeches and the summoning up of the will of the British people. But you know, I don't want to minimize any of that. That's real as far as it goes. But the war would not have been won if it wasn't for the tremendous manufacturing capabilities of the U.S. and the millions of men that they were able to put in the field.
Right.
And you know, that's in the end. You know, if it was just about speeches, you know, the British may have held out for a while, but if they never had the Americans to come in, you know, it would have ended very differently.
Right. But now the manufacturing giant, the Colossus, it's China, both technologically and in manufacturing, just dwarfs the United States. Just the last thing I just want to mention is, I was telling you yesterday, I was reading in China, there is a private firm in Sichuan that has developed hypersonic missiles for less than $100,000 per hypersonic missile. So this is a private company, really. They're private company that's specializing in air travel. They're planning to do hypersonic air travel by 2030 or something like this. But they've learned how to develop these hypersonic missiles that travel at Mach 7 that cost less than a Ford Raptor here in the United States, the new one. You know, like it's $96,000 for them to produce one of these things. The United States we haven't even fielded a hypersonic. Now we have private firms in China that have developed advanced hypersonics for super cheap, and then it's not even part of China's military industrial base. These are just these private guys on their own that are doing like, hey, we figured out how to make these things super cheap, because they know that it only has to fly for 360 seconds. We don't care about anything else. So they have been able to abstain from a lot of like the gold plated. They use some kind of like foam cement as the heat shield, which is supposed to not be possible, but they're like, we don't care, it's going to blow up anyway, so and as long as it flies for 5 minutes, we're all right. And so they did it. It just shows you just how far advanced, you know, the industrial base is in China compared to the United States on just so many sectors. So I just hope we can break through to people that, you know, it's not being unpatriotic or anything to talk about the weakness of the U.S. military. It's good to be humble. It's good to be. It's a patriotic thing. Let's recognize that we don't have this strength, and it's not a bad thing. You know, it just means it's a bad thing when we're trying to start wars and projecting overseas. But you know, maybe we can go back and focus on our own defense. I just so silly the United States for this. To want to have such a large military with 750 military bases all over the world when we have 2 oceans on each side of our country. We have Canada to the north, Mexico to the south. That's it. It's like we are literally the safest country. The problem with our country is all the problems that are happening within, because we can't even take care of our own country. We're too busy just causing problems around the world. It's frustrating. Really frustrating, Dad. And now we're going to World War III. And I was hoping that...
We hope not.
Yeah, well, I was hoping not too. My argument was that the fundamental weakness of the U.S. military will make us avoid it. But after this discussion, now I'm not so sure, because it sounds like that you're saying just that belief in U.S. supremacy is just so baked into our identity that we can't get rid of it. And so we're going to need a more just a humiliating defeat. We might need an actual war where real Americans are getting blown up and then realize like, oh, damn, this was stupid. Why are we over here? We shouldn't have done this. We're not as strong as we thought we were.
Right.
I hope it doesn't happen, but this is going to be a long winter, Dad. I think this is going to be a really harsh winter for Ukraine, and that means some crazy decisions might get made in the next 3 months. You think so?
Yeah, well, there have been a lot of crazy decisions. I think that's the only thing we can be completely certain of.
Yeah. Okay. All right, well, we can end it there. Any final words?
No?
Okay.
Have a good weekend.
Yeah. All right. Thanks, Dad. Have a good rest of the day and a great weekend.
Okay.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.